Hello and welcome to the Feeder Series podcast, your guide to everything from the junior single-seater world. I'm your host Jim Kimberley, and this week we're doing a podcast first as we take a step away from the drivers and commentators that we've had as guests in the past. Instead, we're heading up the food chain a little bit to speak with someone with the power to influence which drivers race in the Feeder Series and eventually F1, and therefore who the commentators talk about. We have Williams Racing's sporting director Sven Smets joining me for a Q&A that I'm genuinely really looking forward to. One final thing before I chat to Sven, if you enjoy listening or watching the podcast, please drop us a like, follow us on your podcast player of choice, subscribe on YouTube, and leave a comment with your thoughts. So let's go straight into it, Sven. It's your name that some people may not be familiar with. You're not one of the drivers like Franco Colapinto or Zach O'Sullivan that we watch on, but you are somebody heavily involved in their careers. You've been at Williams for a few years. How are you, for one? And could you please introduce yourself for people who are unfamiliar with you?
Yeah, first of all, good morning, Jim, and good morning to everybody. So my name is Sven Smets. I'm sporting director of Williams F1 and head of the academy. I joined Williams in 21 and straight away headed up the academy. At that time, I think there was only one or two drivers, and Logan then was the first signing for the academy. And since then, as probably everybody knows, we have been growing with Zach O'Sullivan, Franco Colapinto, Leah Block has joined for the F1 Academy, and Bomber, for example, today in OK Karting. So yeah, we're expanding, and I'm really excited by that, because one of my first things after my WRC co-driver career was heading up the academy for Citroën Racing, and at that time my drivers were a certain Chris Meek, Danny Sordo, and a very young kid which was called Sebastian Ogier, that probably some people will know. So I've always been involved with young drivers throughout my career, and had the pleasure, as being a little bit of an older co-driver, to drive with a then at that time 21-year-old. So it's always fascinated me, and I'm very happy today to be head of the Williams F1 Academy.
It sounds such a varied background, and when I was doing a bit of research, as I try to do, you were in the rally car doing the proper WRC, winning, was it the Australian race when I was doing it for my research, and then that's quite a career change to now being one of the senior figures at an F1 team. Still motorsport, of course, but can you talk us through just a bit of the WRC experiences from your memories?
Yeah, I mean, I was 12 years WRC co-driver. Then, as many drivers at some point in their career, fell without a seat for a little while, and had the opportunity to go into the team as heading up the academy at Citroën Racing at the time, and actually never went back to the co-driver seat. I enjoyed the work in the team. Sebastian Loeb at that time was their main driver. I became team manager there, and stayed there until I moved with Sebastian Ogier to Volkswagen Motorsport. In 2009 and 10, I also had the pleasure, because we were in the PSA group then, to be team manager of the Peugeot Le Mans team, which gave me the sort of track experience as a team manager at that time. And at Volkswagen Motorsport, of course, the main goal was winning championships with Ogier in WRC, before we moved into all sorts of sports. So we did World Touring Car for 3 years, and Rob Huff was one of our drivers, which probably many people also know. And we did the electric car in Pikes Peak, and we had the Rallycross Championship with Petter Solberg before I came to Williams in 21, because there was a few people working at that time here, and they said, look, we're heading up an academy. It's something you did before. The race team needs some become stronger, and F1 was probably the only sport where I hadn't been active in, and I had a few times the chance to do that before. Didn't do it because of various reasons, and I thought this is maybe the last time somebody will ask to come into F1, and and so I did, and yeah, today we're 3 years later.
That's fascinating, and I have to say as well, and I'll come on to it a little bit more later, that you have, I don't want to say transformed, I think it's too strong a word, but you've definitely changed the direction of the academy, which I'm really looking forward to delving into. But you're also the sporting director as well as heading up the academy. What does that role entail?
Yeah, so my role entails today. So I have the academy. I also have heritage. So I have young and old together bundled in one, which is, and then of course there is the race team. So I have let's say the garage side, all the mechanics, the garage technicians, and I have also the engineering. So full in charge of the race team, the logistics around it, the travel around it, the setup of the garages, hospitality, so motorhomes, hospitalities at flyaways, and with that also the gym, because of course pit stops are very important. So the gym is part of that too. That's a little bit the global spectrum, which is quite diverse. I know.
I was about to say, there's a lot of different things to manage. It's like spinning an infinite number of plates. It sounds.
But of course, I'm not on my own to do that. So there's good people in place, and yeah, a good team.
It's just so much going on there, and from the academy side of things, which I'm going to try and focus on because we are the Feeder Series podcast, that the most prominent figure for heading up an academy is Helmut Marko at Red Bull, and the prolificness of the drivers he's selected has been we see up and down the grid now, but half of them have some Red Bull affiliation from their past. How similar a role or not is there between what you have at Williams and heading the academy and what Helmut has there as the spearhead figure maybe in F1 as somebody who runs an academy?
Yeah, I think we're probably a little bit different than the Red Bull Academy, because in the past, maybe a little bit less this year for the first time, the Red Bull Academy had many, many drivers in all feeder series, from karting over FRECA into F4 championships all around Europe, into F3 and F2. So we've decided to go a little bit a different way and try to focus on one or two drivers maximum per category. And when we go down the ladder and the new signings that will come on board, hopefully through this year and the years to come, we try to create a sort of age gap between them, and hopefully have picked the right one that we can bring all the way up to F1. So yeah, we have less drivers, I think, than the Red Bull Academy, and try to give the complete package for the driver to develop into an F1 driver at some point.
It is a different world, I think, from where F1 was probably 10, 15 years ago, having the academies and multiple academies all doing so well. But Williams have had an academy program of sorts for a little while. But as I alluded to a little while ago, that I guess since you're joining, there's been a quality difference, I would suggest. And that's with no disrespect to previous drivers. But the drivers you have been selecting recently are of a higher quality with championships or race wins and whatnot behind them. Is that something you've tried to implement in your, I don't know, your scouting, in your selection, your driver criteria?
Yeah, so I mean, when our current owner Doralton took over Williams, one of the things that was high on their priority list was establishing a good academy, because as we are and as they were too, it is very important to have the drivers of the future in your own academy, because we know there is 20 seats, and it's very difficult to get drivers from another team coming to you. And what is easier than having actually the driver in your own house and just bringing him up through the ranks and putting him in your own seat? That would give you a sort of let's say a much easier job to fill the two driver seats at the end of each year than when you have to go onto the market, which we see sometimes can be a little bit turning out different than some people thought it would go. And we believe in young talent. Williams is on a long-term project, and James has been saying it for a while, that the Young Driver Academy is part of that project, and that's why I was very happy also that I could bring more drivers in, and that we could start with good drivers, drivers that have won championships like GB3, Bondrive European Kart Championship, and the idea is just to continue that path.
Are you looking at what's been? I'm focusing on F2 and F3 in particular, with the presence being in the F1 support slots. that you've got 3 drivers now who have all won in their respective championships. Do you think that's almost the proof of the quality driver you are bringing through? And do you feel any sense of your involvement in that?
Yeah, I mean, if we would be happy with just one win over the season, then that maybe is a little bit short done. But I think all of them have started really well. Of course, Zach and Franco are rookies in F2, and this year also with a new car. So as you could have seen, some teams have needed a little bit more time to sort out, let's say, the understanding of the car. But when we look to Luke, he is in his second year in F3. We know what Luke can do. He has proved that in the past. You could already see it last year in some of the races. I mean, when he went to Monaco last year, he was top 4 material. He was the only rookie in the top 10. I think everybody saw what he did in Macau at the end of last year, which was very impressive. So, of course, for Luke this year, it is to fight for the championship in F3. And I mean, he has started the season very well. It's his second, I think, 4 points behind Mini. So yeah, the bar has become higher for everybody, and we want to raise champions, and because that's what you need to get into F1.
I find it so interesting. It's a fascinating thing, which I think a lot of people don't get to see behind the scenes of. So I really appreciate your time with this. And I could ask questions all day, but I can hand over to our audience who have a lot of questions, which I think shows the level of interest in this. So I'm going to move on to the Ask FS part of the podcast and go to the audience questions we've got from Discord, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'm going to start with this one from Pato on Twitter, who wants to know, the drivers from the academy always say they get help from the teams, but do they also help the F1 teams with the development of the cars? And if so, how?
So Franco, Luke, and Zach are involved in the simulator program that we have here and do development for the F1 team. Of course, now they are also in the European season, which means they're racing as much as we are racing. So it's gone down a little bit. But for example, between Australia and their first race in Imola, there was some time where we were doing China, Japan, and so on. So they came in at least twice a month and do a full day simulator work for the F1 team and do some development, try some things that the main drivers can't do. So they're involved in the F1 development.
Is that just putting the same sim, the same setup, the same everything that Alex and Logan are doing and then trying to hone the car? Is it just as simple as that?
It is most of the time not the same setups because they are trying things for the drivers or for future development or for the 25 car. But sometimes it is also just to do some correlation of what the drivers, for example, drove in Australia and then just put that in the sim and see if actually the sim gives the same lap time, if it feels all the same, if the comments of the drivers make sense that we had in the debrief. So it can go either way.
Fascinating thing. So you have got these drivers who it really does pay to have quality in the academy. I'm going to go on to the next one. This is Nate the Great. And they want to say to start with, rather than no, I've always liked that the talent that Williams brings to its. I've always liked the talent that Williams brings to its academy, like Logan, Franco, and Zach. What are the skills you pay most attention to when recruiting someone to your academy, both on and off the track?
So I would say it's not one skill or one thing. I think it's a mixture of things. So before signing, of course, they go through a process of we have them in the sim, and they normally do at least 1.5 to 2 days full sim, where we give them lots of, you can call it exercises, like qualifying a high fuel race. We ask them to, for example, to change lots of things on the steering wheel. We ask them to do lift and coast just to put, let's say, the mental pressure up. And of course, we look to what they have established before in karting, because we're also talking to 11, 12 years old now. Of course, there is not a huge racing palmarès to look at, but you can already see how they are developing, how they are sitting in their age. Are they actually maybe already driving a year higher in karting and are very young? So there's lots of things that we look at. We have some scouts that visit these races during the weekend, and we talk to the teams where they are racing for, because those teams most of the teams are there for a very long time and have had champions as Max or as George or as Alex already through their run. So for them, it is easy to compare youngsters to people they've had and have made it into F1. So there is a good knowledge in, for example, the karting teams and the teams that are active in the feeder series.
When you get them into the simulator for that initial test, is it shoving them into the car that they are familiar with? Like, do you have a simulator for F2, F3, F4, or anything like that? Or is it just you're going in the F1 car just to see how you shape up because that's where your future lies?
So the F3 and F2 people, we've straight away put in the F1 simulator, and we look at how they get on with that. The younger ones, we put in a, let's say, very high quality esports simulator where we have an F4 and F3 model. So the karters, we do that and see how they get along with that. But we normally have a performance race engineer with them that gives them the program that they have to run. And normally there is somebody from the sports science department there to see how they cope with pressure, how they feedback, and all sorts of things.
Without naming names, and I know I'm doing my own question rather than the audience ones, but you don't, unless you want to name names, which would be a huge surprise. But have you had many people that have come in and you've actually thought this is probably not going to work out with regards to the driver coming in, doing that test, and then think, actually, no?
Yes, we have had drivers that came in for the test, and at the end we didn't sign them. Yes, that happens too.
Just the branching realities of some drivers who never make it fascinating. Yeah, I'm really enjoying this, Sven. Thank you for going through these. Got this one from, I don't even know how to pronounce it, but TWDX Lando F1 on Instagram. Which young driver, if you can name one, who currently doesn't have F1 backing, would you like to see at the Williams Driver Academy?
Oh, that's a difficult one.
I can imagine. And you say about the scouts earlier, maybe let's put it in a different way. Are you actively looking at some for a 2025 recruitment at the moment?
We are looking for 2025 recruitments, but they're all not in F3, F2. So because, I mean, as I said, we're not filling them up with having just, we have Luke in F3. If he does well, he has to move on to F2. We have two in F2. We have Alexandro Giusti for the moment in FRECA. We have Bondarev, who will move up to F4 next year. So what we are looking at is in karting for the moment and signed so from the bottom of the pyramid up into the feeder series.
That's a really long-term approach. It's quite a lot of pressure, I guess, for you as well to be picking somebody at such a young age. It's I'll go into this different question. Unless you want to answer, please go on to yes.
I was going to say that at that young age, it is more difficult because there is less to go by, and it is more of a. Well, I would not. I mean, we still try to constructively see what the driver has done up to that moment. But if we're looking to somebody that moves to his first year OKJ. And you only have, for example, the minis categories to go by, then it is not that easy. But then what we believe in is that the younger, or let's say not the younger, but from a year of 12, 13, we think it's the right time to come into an academy because the sooner we can start working with them, the better we think it is for having the great results at the end of the journey.
Going back to one of the earlier questions about the off-track activities or the off-track things you're looking for as well, is there anything with somebody who's 12 or 13 about like a level of maturity or the way they answer questions then? Is that the sort of thing you are looking for to think, okay, you have the right mentality?
Yeah, it's how they look to things, how they analyze themselves, how they analyze races. And it's very interesting to talk with the 12, 13-year-olds, and you talk with them, for example, about their weekend, and you ask them questions as, how do you think you did yourself this weekend? How do you think the team did? And just get their first impressions, look to their race report, if they write one, and see how they analyze things and what they want to improve from there on. And you can really see the difference sometimes.
My 12, 13-year-old race reports would be, I played Football Manager on the weekend for 12 hours and that's about it. Such a different level for them. Wow. This one's from James O'Rourke, which is probably a nicer question to answer at the moment. Again, from Instagram. What does Zach's win in Monaco mean for the team?
You mean for Williams F1 or for ART?
Well, maybe both. Why not handle both?
No, I think for ART, of course, it was a fantastic result after having Zach not, let's say, in the top 10 in qualifying. I mean, Zach had a fantastic stint on the tyres he was on, and actually managed to keep that gap that was there alive, which meant they had to go for the late VSC or the late safety car call. And of course, you need a little bit of luck that then also comes. But it was only possible to win because he had managed to keep that gap as one of the only ones that were on this strategy, because all the other ones pitted then 2-3 laps before him. So they deserved, actually, the credit goes to Zach keeping his old set of tyres alive all the way up to the end, because the others struggled and had to come off. I mean, if there would have not been a VSC, he would have probably been 4th, 5th, or 6th, which, coming from, I think he started for P15, was still a tremendous result in Monaco, because, as you know, in Monaco you can't pass. So it needs to happen in that kind of strategy. So for ART, I was really, really happy, because what they had said to try from the start really worked, and Zach delivered on that. And of course, for Williams, I mean, having an academy driver winning Monaco, which is it's one of their special races on their calendar, because they're not going to certain overseas tracks, was just great to see. I mean, Zach had a fantastic Bahrain. There was a little bit of, let's say, a wobble in Saudi, but he's bounced back fantastically. And of course, we hope now that the championship is still very alive, because there has been quite a lot of different winners. So he's put himself right back there, and we're going to a few tracks he really likes. So we hope that we see more of that.
It is going to be fascinating. I'm thinking of Zach Silverstone in a Carlin not long ago, and it's really going to come thick and fast after this little break to Canada. Let's go back to the questions then. You kind of answered it already, but I had a few people ask in different ways. So Tia, what do you look for when looking for drivers to sign in the academy? Checo, how do you choose academy members, and how does the academy support them? And then Todoro, which I somewhat asked already, what are the main off-track qualities you look for in a driver? Let's talk about what you see from the scouting perspective then, if I can kind of combine all those questions into one. You've got scouts, you can't go to every single race weekend, but when you have the scouts and you're just looking at them from the track, the on-track racing, how do you tell them what you're looking to get?
So if it is drivers that are not in the academy yet, what we just do is analyze their race weekends, see how they perform, different conditions, rain, dry, the different series on the different tire. If I talk about, let's say, karting for the moment, we try to build a picture. We speak, of course, with the team he drives for, and we have, if we're really interested, we normally invite him for a day to Williams to have a discussion, just to see how he sits himself, his personality, because the personality off track is very important. 50% of performance doesn't come only from the driving. It's who you are, how you analyze in a race, situations that happen in front of you. Maybe someone goes off. How do I analyze that? Or my tires are not so. There is lots of things that you can look at of how a driver at that age is already dealing with the situation. And then, of course, the bigger question is does he learn from that? Does he pick that up, that needs to change, that he has to improve that? And is there still capacity to think about all that while driving? Because today, Formula One is also a lot about the mental capacity that you have when you sit in an F1 car, because there is so much going on that you actually need to build some sort of space while driving to think about lots of other things.
It's so different, I think, or maybe it's a lot more visible, the mental side of things from when I was younger. It just looked like go fast and then smoke some cigarettes and party, James Hunt style, if you want to be fast. Now it's doing a lot more different things. This one's from Theo Poucher, which is very different spelling to who you're probably thinking of. How hard is it to compare juniors across one series when there is a big gap between the performance of their teams? So I suspect when you see, like, for example, Zach in F3. Carl in an F3 outfit doesn't seem to match the speed of the F2 and GP3 outfits that rode in now, of course. How can you do that comparison? Because realistically, he was never going to be in the championship fight.
Yeah, so that is a genuine question and is indeed sometimes a difficult one. So what we, of course, always try to do is that even Zach in Carlin at the time is to try to base it on the teammate, which, of course, first of all, it means then that he needs to have a good teammate, which is also not always the case. But we then try to see, to look to lap times, because Zach, even at Carlin, had a few fantastic runs. He won Silverstone, if everybody remembers, on the slick tire in the rain in Hungary.
He almost won that as well.
Yes, exactly, where actually the car becomes less important and then can show what he's actually capable of. So it is a difficult one. I agree to that. So normally first based is the teammate. How is he doing in comparison with a teammate? Because if your teammate is beating you, let's say, every race, every qualifying, every free practice, then there is a sort of performance that you can extract from that.
Always have to beat your teammate.
Exactly.
No matter the level, you have to beat your teammate. There's a couple of questions which I find really fascinating just on Bondarev, who you've signed this year, and you talk about karting a lot. And I would love to, honestly, Sven, I would love to have you talking for the next 4 hours and have these questions answered. But I'm going to try and get through as many of these questions as possible. So Claudia wants to know, what are the future plans for Bondarev? And you've mentioned F4, but Cesar Valero, will we see your academy driver, Alexander Bondarev, competing in one or more F4 races this season, as a separate question?
Yes. So we have a program in place for him. So he's, for the moment, still concentrating on the OK karting, the European Championships, but he is starting to test, I think, in 5 days. He will be testing. I mean, he has already done F4 testing, but the real test program is starting in 5 days. And once started, so at the beginning of June, there is an intensive test program all the way up to the end of the year. And he will do the last 2 races of the Italian F4 Championship, and then will prepare for F4 UAE in the winter to then participate in F4 UAE in January, February, before he starts racing in Italian F4.
We are speaking at the end of May, and you're already projecting stuff into what the Italian F4 start around April next year. So it's such a long-sighted program that you have to really have faith in your drivers to complete a season in the way you expect to do this, surely.
Yeah, but from OK karting into car is quite a big change, because they're leaving their karting seasons behind and go into cars. So you cannot just ask from them to stop karting today and start racing tomorrow in a car. There is a sort of transfer period where you need to have them testing a lot with a car.
But I have to assume also that you've got something in place with, say, Giusti to think about, well, where are you going to be placed next year? It's your second season for ECA, so presumably FIA F3, that you're having those conversations now, surely.
Yes, so the conversations for seats for next year normally start around Silverstone. All the teams start to be wondering and positioning themselves. And yes, these conversations actually already have started for all our drivers. What we're doing next year. For F4, for F3 and F2, there's only been 4 races at the moment, and 3 for F3. So it's a little bit early to really also have a first real discussion in-house with all the people that are involved in the academy to see where they sit, how we think that they have performed. But when you are in karting, you need to make a 2-year plan. There is no other choice than that. And for Giusti, normally his next is FIA F3, because it is his second season in FRECA.
So you really need to start the season well for you to plan for the future, because if you've won all 4 races at the start of the season, then it's going to look a lot better. Even if you, that's your hint. Any future drivers watching, do well at the start of the season, and then you'll be sitting pretty. Speaking of Giusti, VTL SPN, Vettel Spin, maybe. I don't know what they're trying to say. How did you come up with the idea to hire Alessandro Giusti in the academy? Can you describe the process of scouting him for us?
Yeah, so we had a scout going to a few races, of course, through our let's say connections with ART. ART had been looking to Alessandro themselves. He did some extraordinary things last year as a rookie with a very small team. I think it started as a one-car team even in the beginning of the season, and then a second car was added through the middle of the year or the last few races of the year. Based on all that, having him here, having him doing half a day sim, seeing what he was capable of, we decided to bring him into the academy because there was between Luke and Bondarev, there was actually a gap where a driver really fits nicely because he sits really in the middle of it. And that's why we signed Alessandro, based on the performance he had in his first rookie year in FRECA and the things we saw when he visited the factory.
It's been a good signing, and I was just watching his races over the weekend in Spa, and looking promising, looking very promising. We've got two questions which are tied to your own experiences from Coldplay McPin fan. How have your years of experience in rally, specifically co-driving, helped you to develop the next generation of Williams drivers? And Fly Bondi Fanatic, adding to it, how would his time in rally, but also alongside Jos Capito at Volkswagen Motorsport, prepare him for your role at Williams? So I guess the transition that you've had and how that's influenced how you work now.
Yeah, I had the pleasure to work with, at first as a co-driver, I sat next to Francois Duval, which was somebody that was very, very talented. But at the time, when actually I came into the seat next to him, he was put on let's say the bench because he had had a few crashes and his co-driver then left. And so Citroën replaced him with Carlos Sainz Sr. for two events. And he then asked me if I wanted to drive with him. And I think I was nearly 40, he was 21. And I found myself next to somebody that was very talented, but a few things were wrong as in terms of how he was approaching races and how he was preparing races. He was somebody that was really going off talent. But then if you go to new places, then sometimes there needs to be some preparation and you need to look videos that you have made during recce. And I brought that just my experience of how I had been working for a long time with Freddie Loix. Actually, Carlos Sr. was one of the ones that taught us quite a lot of things of what you can do to prepare a rally, which sounds really bizarre, but we were young when he was at Toyota, one of the head drivers. I brought that just to him, and that really transformed him during the 8 months that I was with him. And we won Australia, and we're actually second best performer out of the last 8 rallies. I think because of changing his approach to everything and starting not to crash anymore and actually getting really good results, was one of the things I think why Citroën then brought me in to run their young academy, because they were having problems, and I had the pleasure to work with somebody like Chris Meek. And I really enjoyed it. I think it is fascinating to see all these different individuals with the same goal, with a different approach. And because everybody has, some things are done well, maybe some things are not done so well. So if you then add actually the tools and the whole spectrum for a young driver, because you know what works there, but he's not doing it, you give it to him. And you know now that, as you said yourself, the mental aspect of F1 has become so big that it's something that when you are young, you don't really take all that into account. I mean, I've not talked about our sports science department, but today every driver from karting onwards has already their own physical coach. So we prepare them actually for the year ahead. So somebody, let's say like Bondarev now, actually physically is already ready to drive an F4 car, although he's still doing okay karting. Same with, for example, Alessandro is already ready to drive an F3 car, and actually looking to his stats today, because I got him, it's the end of the month, he's actually nearly ready to do an F2 car. So we prepare them. They have their own coach. They have to do nearly every day. They do exercise. They have to log. So there is a real. If the coach is not with them, they have to log themselves. They have to start to look to what they're eating, their sleep. All that is very important. They have a sports psychologist where they can discuss problems they had in the weekend, and we try to do that from a very young age in different levels. Of course, we're not asking somebody that is 12 to go every day to the gym, but there is a very slight program that he already can do, because we know, I mean, the G-forces just crawl up throughout the feeder series, and the impact on the body is hard. But if you're well prepared for it, it's actually, I mean, Alexandru gave the best comment ever last year as a rookie. He was doing sports because he's a very fit person, but he was not training in function of the sport he was doing. It was the driving that was shaping him, his neck and everything. And he went to Zandvoort, which is a very hard track when it's dry. And he said at the end of the race, I was really tired. And I'm quite sure I lost a little bit of performance because of that in my last laps, because I was tired. I could feel I was tired. That has an influence on your driving. He said this year he did the tests in Freca. He said, I can't imagine how I drove last year's race and how I've been doing the testing. I did 3 days. I couldn't even feel anything. So he's better prepared, which gives you more mental capacity, because you're not fighting the physical condition that you maybe don't have at that time. But that is very important.
You've just got so much deep knowledge. I'm going to wrap up with this final question because we're unfortunately running out of time. But I'd be remiss not to ask about, well, Teo Pourchaire and BVB Ocon want to know, I'll combine their questions, but plans for FP1. Of course, everyone's looking at it. We've got Zach and Franco, both. Either anything planned that you can share at this point?
No, so we haven't sat together yet. I think it will probably happen after Silverstone. We will sit together and then we'll make an FP1 program. But as you mentioned, it's very important for us that it's our academy drivers who are doing these. So somewhere in the season, people will see the drivers of the academy in a FP1.
Well, people who listened to last week's podcast will know that Franco Colapinto is looking at Brazil, ideally. So there's your hint, Sven. If you're going to put a bit of car, that'll be.
I'll take that with me into the meeting.
You'll make a lot of people happy in South America. I'm going to say thank you so much, genuinely, Sven. This has been such a good podcast, such a good conversation. I'm going to say thank you to everybody else who are watching and listening. If you're watching on YouTube, please drop a like on the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It all really helps us out. And if you're listening, leaving a review on the podcast platform you're listening on is greatly appreciated. Finally, check out feederseries.net for more Feeder Series insight, and follow Feeder_series and FS Americas on X and Feeder Series Net on Instagram. You can find the links to all of those, plus where to find everyone in this episode, in the YouTube description or the podcast show notes. Until next time, we have been the Feeder Series Podcast. Goodbye.